Hey, this is Jake from BIM Template. In this video, I would like to go over how to create an area scheme and do automated calculations for those area schemes using schedules. So one of the things I see a lot of people do is they'll be doing occupancy and egress plans, and they'll be setting those up using rooms and doing like rough calculations, or they're doing the calculations inside of an Excel file or in a Word file, and then manually inputting that back into the Revit model and assigning that information. And you can even see that sometimes they can do it and put it on sheets and then doing those calculations manually. The problem with that is that you are having to redo those calculations every single time the plans change. And even if you wait to the last minute to do that before submission, sometimes you still have to make those changes for permit purposes. And one of the things that helps speed up this process is to be able to automate the egress calculations, is using the model itself. And so when you update the model, then all the information automatically updates itself without you having to manually go through and audit and do all that information. It doesn't replace you having to know the information when you are doing the calculations, but this will allow you to be able to speed up a lot of your process. And we take advantage of this in our ultimate template. So I'm going to give you a very low level, a very high level overview of how this works in our template. So the first thing we want to do to get this set up is we want to use an area plan. We don't want to use rooms in a floor plan. And the reason we don't want to do that is when we do rooms, we are basically adjusting the room, and this is the information we see throughout the entire model. And we have access to this throughout the entire model, which can be good, but can also be bad because we're tying a lot of information to this dynamically set information, and we have like doors and windows that are all tied to this, and that can be good and bad. But we typically don't like to use code analysis or any sort of analyses what we need to do calculations for inside rooms. And that's because sometimes you need to be, a lot of the time actually, you're needing to be able to do multiple types of calculations. And to do multiple types of calculations, having those be separate and untied from the rooms is key, because when you're doing calculations, sometimes you'll have like two different rooms, but the two different rooms will have different calculation information, or maybe all of these will have, both of these will be the same occupancy type. And so you want to be able to calculate that as one instead of having these as two separate items in, say, a schedule when you're doing the calculations. So how we work around that is creating the area schemes. And in order to do that, we have Revit comes with two existing ones, the gross building and the rentable. You can use these, but I like to create my own custom ones and use those in my own template because we can dynamically like manage all that information better. And the way to do that is to go up to the architecture tab, room and areas, and then go into area and volume computations. This is where we will then click on area schemes, and this is where we create our different area schemes. And this is how we're actually going to be doing our schedules, because our schedules that we create are then also tied to the area scheme. And so they won't actually be dynamically adjusted to, say, like a room and affected by everything else. And you can create these multiple different calculation schemes, and they're not affecting each other. So what we're going to do is we're going to just do an egress one. And then you can change the name, the description, calculates egress. And you can create any other, you can do a lot of different things. You can do like BOMA calculations, you can do occupancy, you can do plumbing fixture, you can do parking, like we have in our ultimate template. But we're just going to do an egress here, and I'm just going to demo it. So you can see we created the scheme. Now we need to generate the view. So if we go to view, we go to plans, area plans, we can go down to egress and create the view. So we're just going to do the first floor. And then we can either create the automatic boundaries. Sometimes it works. Sometimes we need to specify where the actual boundary is, because Revit will automatically do based on what we set up in the scheme. So if we do that, you can see. So you can see that it's showing basically to the inside. Sometimes when you're doing a building footprint calculation, you want to be able to do to the outside wall. So sometimes you can just want to be able to specify that separately. But for this example, we're just going to go in here and use that. So it's showing the exterior walls are automatically calculated, which is great. You can see we already have like rooms visible. You can see the rooms in the floor plans, which is great for area schemes, but we're just going to hide those because we don't need those. Now let's go and hide these because we don't want those. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go to the architecture, add a boundary, and we're going to separate this. We'll just separate it down the middle there. All right, so now that we've created this area plan under, okay, so we're in the right one, and we want to add the areas. So if we go to here, add area 1, add area 2, and we can change the name, area 1, area 2. And one of the great things is that we can dynamically change this. Oh, we want to actually lock those. So now that when we do this change, to this model change, everything will dynamically update. So these area tags will kind of move around, so they'll be not exactly dynamically centered or anything like that. Sometimes they're referenced off of this wall because it's closer to there, but you just need to pay attention to that when you're making plan changes. Okay, so we have that all set up. Now what we need to do is we need to create our schedule. So the way that we do create our schedule is we go to new schedule and quantities, we scroll down to area schedules, and we specifically select on egress. And what we can do is, now that we have our egress area schedule, we're just going to leave that, click OK. And we want to add our name, our number. We want to add the area. And then now that we're in here, all right, so we have that information. What does this tell us? This tells us just the area, but we want to show the occupancy for this schedule. So it's done one of two ways. You can either just manually create a parameter and then manually fill out like it's 100% per 100 feet per square foot person, and then you can then do a calculation that'll automatically calculate that. What we are going to do is we are actually going to take advantage of key schedules. And key schedules, if you do not know, are basically a schedule that is isolated away from the main schedule here, that you can pre-populate information and assign it to a key. So you can assign occupancy, you can assign what the load is, you can assign different values such as like daylight and ventilation calculation data. And then what you do is inside of your main schedule, you just assign that key and it'll automatically bring in that information. So what we're going to do is we're going to set that up. And the great thing about key schedules is that even though they are area key schedules, they are not specific to the area scheme. They can be area scheme independent. So this means that you can cross-pollinate information without having to manage multiple different key schedules that have the same data. So we're just going to go into here and then go into the area egress. And we're just do key schedule, and this is going to be occupancy, occupant load value. All right, so that's going to be our key name. And once we do that, we're going to generate it, and then we're just going to have a key name, and we're going to create a parameter. And this is just going to be a parameter. You know, typically you want to create a shared parameter because then you can link that inside of an area tag. It'll automatically update in there. But in here, we're just going to use a project parameter. So what we're going to do is we're going to then, this is going to be occupant load value. And this is just going to be a number, because if you do a integer, sometimes you can cause some issues. And if you do lengths, when you're doing these sort of calculations, Revit sometimes will do a lot of rounding, which gives you inaccurate numbers. So typically we like to specify everything as a raw number, because Revit will not round that number until it's like I believe it's 6 digits past the decimal point. And so now we have that. We're going to load that in there. Click OK. And now we are in our key schedule. So you can see we have our key name, and we also have our occupant load value. So what we want to do now is we want to insert data row. So right now we have our first key. This first key is just going to be our business. That's going to be the key. And then what we want to do is we want to do 50, and that's going to specify 50 persons per square foot. As you can see, that's the raw number that we can input. And then we can insert another one, and we can say this is the arena for an assembly occupancy. And then that one can just say, we'll just say that one's 15 person per square foot. And one of the things you have to pay attention to when you're doing these is net versus gross, but that's something that the user will have to pay attention to when they are doing their calculations and setting up the line work for how that's supposed to be calculated. So that's just something that we do specify in our schedules that they can then coordinate and make sure they're setting it up. So if it's like net, then they want to like block out the different areas that are to be excluded from that calculation. All right, so we have that set up now. Now what we need to do is add that key into the main schedule. So now that we have that, let's go back into our main schedule and we can see that we have our occupant load value here. So we can then add that into here and click OK. And this is going to be, this is not the right one, sorry. This is our key. We should rename that actually. So let's go and rename that. So this is our actual key. So I'm going to move that to up here. So occupant load value, and then we're going to go back and we're going to rename this. This is going to be our occupant ratio. And that should, that's not updated because we didn't change the parameter name, we just changed the way it was labeled. So if we go into here, change that. Ratio. All right, click OK. All right, that's updated. And that should then be updated in here. And then we'll just change the appearance of that. All right, so now we have that all set up. Now, what I can do is then assign this area to have an occupancy value. So you see this arena, and now that we have assigned the key, it automatically imports the information into here. So now we are seeing that this area is 15 square foot per person, and we can do the same thing here. We can assign business, and it brings that value into here, which is really great. That can really make it a lot easier without us having to manually input all this information. And also we can like pre-populate all this data inside of our project templates without us having to constantly go back to the code to be able to import that information. We get, as long as we are ensuring that that information is coordinated, we are just able to then do the drop down for that. And you can do this for all of the different occupancies that you have set up in your municipality. All right, so now that we have that, we want to then take this information and divide it by this so that we can get an occupant load value. So what we want to do now is we want to create a calculated parameter. So the way we do that is occupants. All right, and we want this to be a number. You can do this to be an integer, but you have to do a little bit more calculation, and I'd rather just do it as a number and then do some rounding and set it up as a integer later, or show it as an integer. So what we want to do is, now that we're doing a calculated value, we can click this and we can see what our fields, our parameters that we can use as a reference to do the calculation. So let's do the area, and then we want to divide that by the occupant ratio. Now this may not work because I think this isn't going to work because we need to zero out the square foot in consistent units. Yep. So we need to first take this and we want to divide it by 1 square foot. And then, all right, and there we go. So now that we have that, we now have our occupant. Let's change that to occupant load. All right. Now that we have that, we have our occupant load. And so we've taken this number, divided by this number. We then have 178 people to be allowed in this space. And what we can do is we can then round that down, because we can't basically show an occupant load of a fractional of a person and specify more. That's the way that I was taught. So what we can do is now take this and we can add a formula that's basically just says round down. And these are very simple formulas that you can use. Revit doesn't have very complicated formula sequences, mostly just if statements and just simple arithmetic and rounding things that you can do. You can do that, and now we rounded. Now we have a rounded occupant load in here. So that's great. So now we have a different occupant load in here. And what's great is that if we were to then go back into here and we were to then change this and move this down, and we were to move this to say something like that, and this is the example I was talking about with the area tags. We move that back in here and we go back to our schedule. You can see we have a completely different occupant load for the space now, which is great. So now everything is all dynamically linked. We don't have to go back and forth and change things and manually update all this information. And what's great about key schedules is you wouldn't do this on this sort of schedule, but you can do this for different schedules that you would be using. But we can actually change this. So now it could be like 10 people instead. And that dynamically links and changes inside of our main schedule. So then we have a different calculated value, which is just really, really great. And it allows us to make Revit a little bit more smart about our workflows. And now that we have this information, if we were to go back to our area plan, we can then set this information up inside of our tags here, and we can then add that calculated value inside of our tag so that it can actually process that information from the schedule inside of here. So we can do everything very automatically. And when we're setting up these occupant load plans, we can actually show that calculated value updated in real time. So there's no more having to manually coordinate inside the schedule, inside of the tag, or in text notes. It's all automatic based on what the diagram and what the system is. And which, again, if we go back to, say, this one, we don't have any of those calculated values inside of here. We just have the different rooms. That's the other thing. But we don't have the area calculations. We can do a completely different scheme inside of here, which makes things really, really great when we're trying to do all these calculated values. And this is the sort of process that we have integrated into our ultimate template. We have set up a lot of these different key schedules inside of our project that will actually be able to do all this calculation. So you can see we have our occupant load. We also have naming. You can tie names to the keys as well. You don't have to just tie data information. You can show like the net, and so that can show up in tags. You can do the calculated values, and all that information can then those values inside of the calculable parameters in the main schedules, those can then be say, all right, we're not going to process anything unless this shows as a yes, and then we can calculate what these parameters are. And so it can like really free up a lot of the overhead burden for the system to be able to do those calculations every time something changes. And you see the same thing, we have that with our area occupancy classification schedule that we have for the different areas. And what's great about the key area schedules is that you can specify multiple different code bases for it. So I could specify this as IBC, and if I also live in, say, the Chicago area, I could then, do another one, and I can fill that out, and this can be a CBC A-1. I don't believe that was the correct one for the Chicago Building Code, but you're able to then have multiple different code bases specified, and you're able to have those all be in the same one. So when you start a project and you're not using that jurisdiction's code base, you can simply just go through and highlight and delete that information, and you don't need to use that, so it's completely deleted. So you basically have this really robust template to start from that accommodates both different code bases. Now there's a little bit of wiggle room you had to account for when you are setting up the calculations inside of these, but at a very base level, that is what we use inside of our schedules, inside of our occupancy area calculations. And we have ones for occupant load and egress, parking, plumbing fixtures, zoning. We also have ones that specifically for like area separation. We have wall opening percentage areas in our schedules, so you can actually like do the calculated values for the wall area, surface area, and you can do the separation range. We have a key schedule set up just specifically for that. We also have ones for room light and ventilation. We can have that set up, and we can try and coordinate those with the doors and windows and making sure that we have proper lighting and ventilation for the project. And we do all this just automatically through key schedules, and users are able to manage all this information. Some of the things that we do in our schedules is we actually have them set up so that they will flag things that are incorrect inside of our schedule. So we do a couple of different things where we actually will color our schedules, showing like blue, we have our ones where users have to manually input information. Green will be our calculated values, just showing like this is the calculated value you need to pay attention to. And then we have red, And red basically is a warning saying, based on this information and this information, this is incorrect, or you've specified something that is incorrect. So that means you need to go through here and double check that and make sure that is coordinated, because we have already imported all of this information into here. And so we can then do those conditional formatting to double check against all those values. So it's really, really powerful to be able to set up and use these area code calculation schedules. And we highly recommend that you go through and audit and include that. And if you don't want to go through all the work to set up these code analysis schedules, you just want to be able to use what we have or import it into your existing template, you can get it over at our website at bimtemplate.com. We have other collections that support these sort of analysis and these advanced workflows to be able to streamline your process, make your infrastructure more robust when you're developing projects, so that you're cutting down on a lot of the duplicate work and manual effort that goes into developing a project. I hope that gives you a little bit of insight into how to do area calculations to automate your process. If you have any questions, check us out at bimtemplate.com.